So here's the thing, haven't you noticed how straight men don't really tend to talk about sex? Well, what I mean by that is that they don't talk positively about their experiences with their friends or with their partners, or almost at all. They certainly don't bring the subject up. They might join in a conversation, but they're not going to be the first to mention it. Does this make me an exception to this? I'm on YouTube and I talk positively about sex. But let's look at some other sex ed YouTubers. We've got Hannah Witton, I've mentioned her on this channel a few times. Probably the premier British sex ed YouTuber. Then we've got Lacey Green, one of the first people on YouTube to talk about sex and sex education. She's from America. In fact, she used to be a Mormon. It's really quite an interesting story, Lacey's. And then we have Dr. Lindsay Doe, who runs the channel Sexplanations. She is a clinical sexologist. She's also in America, and of course, being a clinical sexologist, she absolutely knows what she's talking about, and her content is from more of a medical side of things, but it's a really good perspective. And another channel I've come across in the last couple of months is by a girl called Eva. She lives in Ontario in Canada, and she runs a channel called What's My Body Doing? She looks at sex ed from a more academic point of view, but it's really interesting and it's really, really positive, as you might expect. But what do all these people have in common? Yes, they're women. Now, less on the sex ed side of things and more just on talking positively about sex, there are men who do it, but they are almost exclusively gay. All of them, and including the 4 girls that I mentioned a moment ago, they have content for men, and it's really good content for men. But are there any straight men who make YouTube videos about this kind of stuff? Am I the only straight man on YouTube to talk positively about sex? That's what I want to know. If you do know anybody else, by the way, do leave their channels in the comments. I'd be really interested to find out who they are. But this just backs up the old stereotype. In the last 20 years, it's been much more common for women to talk in their friendship groups about sex. And this has got a lot to do with the culture. You know, women tend to be in their friendship groups and talk about things which they don't talk about outside their friendship groups. So sex is one of those things. But also there's been shows on television and in movies and things like that. So Sex and the City, for example. Obviously, that show was a group of women talking about sex quite a lot of the time. And that, of course, translates into the real world. But you look at the stereotypical group of men talking about sex. If you watch coming-of-age films like American Pie, it's always about how many girls have you had, and it's all about intercourse. It's all about did you actually manage to do it, not about was it good, what was the foreplay like, you know, all these things positively about sex. Did you have a nice evening? Was the girl sweet? You don't get those questions asked. It doesn't happen. And the problem is that if you are watching these movies and these programs and you have these examples, then you're just going to follow the stereotypes. It's kind of social conditioning, you know. You do what everybody else does in general. So if you never see this in popular culture, if you never see it in television or in movies, then why on earth would you bring it up with your friends? You know, perhaps my situation is unique. I was a welfare officer in my student union. My grandma and granddad on my mum's side were both nurses, and my mum was a student nurse for a while. And perhaps I have no shame. It was noticeable when I went to conferences and training events and that kind of thing when I was a welfare officer, that the other welfare officers from the other universities and student unions around the country were either women or gay men. The vast majority of them not cis-straight males. And you know what? It kind of lives up to the stereotype, doesn't it? Now you could say I'm being very British about this, and what it actually is that because the British are almost entrained to not talk about sex. It's just something which needs to be caught up with men. But it's the same really in almost all Western cultures. The women seem to have been sexually liberated and at least can talk to other women about sex. Whereas men, no, all they're interested in is putting that another notch on the bedpost. And obviously this is a problem, because it not only does it perpetuate this idea about women being sexual objects to men, it doesn't improve anybody's self-esteem or sex life, and it certainly doesn't improve anybody's relationship. And this is something which I at least hope is now changing, because we have sex and relationships education in schools, which means that young men will be taught about relationships as well as just the biological aspects of sex, which have been taught for 30 years. Doesn't make relationships any better, does it? Maybe this is one of the last taboos about sex, and that is men actually starting conversations about it. I hope that can change, and I hope it will improve. I also hope that we can start it now. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, do give it a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe, because I make videos every single week, and I shall see you next time. Bye-bye.